fell victim to abuse. I was sexually abused by a neighbour who was very, very close, was like an adopted grandfather. So, you know, that tragic but sadly age-old story of, in this case and in most cases really, an older man in a position of power that uses innocence and manipulates that. So I suffered abuse for a very long time.
Welcome to the Voices of Gender Equity, the podcast where we influence you, the listener, into action by bringing you authentic conversations, success stories, and practical advice. Join us as we amplify the voices of individuals from all walks of life, activists, scholars, CEOs, and everyday champions, sharing their insights, their journeys, and the strategies for driving meaningful change. So whether you're a seasoned advocate or just beginning to explore this fascinating topic, Voices of Gender Equity is your space to listen and learn and engage. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the Voices of Gender Equity, real and raw stories of impact. Our guest today was named a finalist in the 2016 for the Australian of the Year Award. She's one of Australia's 100 most influential women in 2014 by the Oz Financial Review and Westpac Bank, and a 2014 Telstra Businesswoman of the Year finalist. She's also a humanitarian lawyer, a certified speaking professional, a best-selling author of the book titled Equal Justice, a retired British Army officer, a former terrorism and war crimes prosecutor, a hostage survivor, and a mother of teenage triplet boys. Here is Rabia Siddique. So Rabia, it's really, really great to have you here today.
Lovely to be
I've been
with you,
excited
Henry.
to talk to you. You know, it's always having a good chat with you. Tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit more about you, because you do so much.
Don't many of us.
Yeah.
So I guess if you were to read my formal bio, you would see a string of things that I do with the many hats that I wear. I've been an international human rights lawyer and criminal lawyer for the last 30 years, starting my career here in Australia, but working for a large part of that overseas as well, particularly in theatres of conflict and war and poverty.
Yeah.
I am also a retired Army officer. I served in the British Army as a legal officer for 8 years. In the last 10 years, I've been working, in addition to my human rights practice, as a leadership, resilience and diversity consultant. And I guess like many people at my age and stage in life, I also have the privilege to be a non-exec board director for a number of not-for-profit organisations, mainly those focused in education, social impact, social services and healthcare. And I'm an ambassador for a number of organisations as well, organisations, charities, profit-for-purpose, not-for-profit organisations that focus on providing all types of support and assistance, mainly to women and children and victims of trauma and violence. So, and then there's the small matter of parenting on steroids. So I'm
You have three,
I'm a
right?
mum, a single mum, to triplet boys who are about to turn 16.
Wow.
Yeah. So my cup overflows, as they say.
And I see like there's a really, really interesting correlation between everything that you do.
Yeah.
Like it really sums up into that service aspect. It really is. It seems like the driver of what you do and why you do it, they're all, the same, and it comes from that kind of that service, that for purpose.
Yeah, it really does.
Reason. Like,
It really
where does that come from?
You're right. I would say that everything I do comes from this very strong core drive to serve and to serve others and to live a life bigger and beyond myself. Where does it come from? I guess the seed was sown very early on in life. I'm the eldest of two children.
Okay.
My dad is an Indian Muslim. My mum is Australian. We lived for several years as I was growing up in India, but then, like many people around the world, my parents chose to migrate to Australia, mainly to provide the best future they thought that they could for the family.
Yeah.
But in those early years when we came across to Australia in the mid-1970s, I witnessed my dad in particular, and to a lesser extent my mum, suffer a lot of discrimination and prejudice and bias for the colour of his skin, for his accent, for his religion. And my dad is a man that handled it with a lot of grace and humour. But, you know, when you're behind closed doors, you see the different side of it. And it was really clear to me, even as a child, that what my father in particular went through caused deep wounds. And that was the seed, I think, that then germinated and grew later on in life. And I remember thinking at the time, that was really unfair and really tough. And that I was going to live a different life and do what I could to make sure that people were more accepting and kinder to each other. So I guess, you know, we call that now social justice. So really that was the seed, I think, the beginning of this passion and this calling to serve. That was probably solidified a number of years after that, still as a child, when I fell victim to abuse. I was sexually abused by a neighbour who was very, very close, was like an adopted grandfather. So, you know, that tragic but sadly age-old story of, in this case and in most cases really, an older man in a position of power that uses innocence and manipulates that. So I suffered abuse for a very long time. And eventually when I plucked up the courage to tell my parents, we were still very much a family of outsiders in Australia. We hadn't quite been accepted into the society, into the community. And so a decision was made, which was a very common one back in those days, to sweep it under the carpet. We don't talk about it. We don't.
We're not going to rock the boat.
Absolutely, for fear of shame and stigma and humiliation and ostracization when we were madly trying to assimilate, which was the buzzword back then. So my parents did the best they could. You know, they, like all of us, were the product of their experiences and generation and culture. But I believe firmly to this day that the impact of that decision left me feeling very voiceless and with very little power over my life. And that would, in time, become the greatest driver for me to turn the injustice that I had experienced and the suffering that I had experienced as a positive legacy for change. Firstly in my life, and then in the life of others that I felt, honestly, that I was called and destined to serve. It could have gone the other way. And for a while it did, you know, and until I was entering adulthood, until I became a woman, the abuse was starting to consume me and really damaging me. And if I wasn't already conscious when I came to this country of my differences, I felt even more alone and othered because I was harbouring this huge secret that I couldn't share with anyone. So I felt so incredibly lonely and felt like I was suffering alone. But thankfully, fate, life intervened, and I found myself in an environment when I needed it the most that created this incredible space of inclusion and belonging and a bunch of people that started believing in me. It was actually my high school. And it was the first time I felt that I was worthy. That I was worthy than what I had experienced. That
I felt seen at that point?
I felt seen. I felt validated. I felt heard. And it was the first opportunity that I was given to make a difference in a leadership role as the captain of my school. And that was pivotal for me because it was only then that I realised that I could take control of my life. And maybe I could also have some dreams.
That's
So,
it. That's amazing.
yeah,
Just the resilience coming out of, the situations that you've been in. And I always tell people, I say, it's when you're dealing with struggle, it's understanding that that's needed,
yeah,
and
yeah,
when you can come out of that struggle, now
yeah,
you're an expert.
yeah.
And we don't really see that on the
No,
day to day,
so true.
So now you're an expert now.
Yeah,
So anything that happens or anything that comes your way, you already know how to get through that because
yeah.
you've done it already. If you can build a house once, you can build it twice,
So
right?
now, at this time in my life, I totally resonate with what you're
Yeah.
saying.
When you
When
were,
you're struggling and when you're suffering and when you're in pain, as a child or as a young adult that doesn't
that's,
know any different, it is just struggle and pain. Thankfully, yeah, I've lived long enough to go through a lot of struggle and pain, but that has been a gift.
yeah.
Because there is a lot of truth in the adage that growth only comes through struggle and discomfort.
Yeah.
And I absolutely believe that. And now, as you said, when we go through times, as we will continue to do, go through times of challenges and loss and tragedy and injustice and pain, I'm very blessed that in the midst of that, I can call upon my experiences
Yeah.
and my life lessons. And at some point, obviously, leaning into the pain and feeling what you need to feel, but at some point being able to provide that circuit breaker to myself emotionally and psychologically and say, okay, universe, God, what is the lesson here? And it's not revealing itself yet, but I'll hang in there and I'll do the best I can and just have faith that the lesson, the growth, the maturity, the wisdom will come in time.
And there's two things off of that because I love that you said, when you are a child and you're going through that, it just becomes just struggle and struggle. And I was like, when you said that, I was instantly thinking that's why I was working in education for so long. It
Yeah.
was because I knew, me growing up, I actually had a privilege where I always had older people around me, even if we were in the street.
Yeah.
I always had the older guys around me to tell me, "Hey, that's not all right. Don't do that. Don't do it that way."
Yeah.
I always had that
Sort of
those
guidance and
people
mentorship.
there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be that for those kids at school because I know when you are struggling, you don't see it. You won't see it. And you just need somebody around you to say, hey, remember what you did last week? How you got through that last week?
Yeah.
That's just the same thing.
Yeah.
You can get through this
So true.
and we can keep going.
Yeah.
You just need those kinds of, that kind of support around you.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of kids just don't have that. And we need more of that. And when you were speaking about, going through the pain, it's really using the pain and not letting it use you.
Yeah.
Being constructive with that pain and channeling it into, that positive that can come out of it.
Yeah.
It's using it for that instead of letting it be negative for you, using it in the positive way and putting that out. Yeah.
Very true. And I guess in the 3 decades that I have had the privilege to work in the areas and with the communities and people that I have, I hear what you're saying and I even hear the words coming out of my mouth. And I realise that's all very well for those of us that have the ability to be resilient and have the resources around us. And I think that's the key. We are privileged to have resources around us. You talk about having these incredible role models around you who were able to guide you and steer you. For so many people, they don't have those resources. And I look back and I can see that I had, when I needed it the most, people around me that believed in me enough, that were able to guide me enough, that were able to validate me and hold me up when I really needed it. And I was also blessed and continue to be blessed with absolute clarity around my values. and who I am and how I want to live my life, which includes how I want to treat others and how I want to walk through the world.
Yeah.
So the thousands of people that I've worked with that share their stories of abhorrent abuse and suffering and marginalisation, I realise that for them, sometimes the only thing they have is faith or a strong, fierce attachment and clarity around their values. And from that, surrounded by the worst of humanity, somehow the best of humanity finds its way to the surface and blossoms. So, you know, I guess I want to share that because for people listening to this podcast that may be in really, really tough situations and don't have necessarily the people around them or the economic resources to avail themselves of professional support, we can find that from within. If we are willing to believe and to just sometimes have blind faith that we all do have the answers from within.
100%. We are a lot stronger than we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely.
At the most of the times.
Absolutely.
You know, and everything that you do, I always wonder when I talk with people, I always want to know, who are your role models? Like, who did you see or who are you around that you were like, you know what? I like how they handle these things. I want to be kind of like that. I want to take the little bits and pieces from the people that are around me. Who are those people that were around you? Did you have any?
Yeah, interesting. I think growing up, initially as a child, it was my parents. You know, they came together, fell in love, got married and built a life at a time when the union between people from different religions, countries, of different colours was very much frowned upon. So I guess my first heroes and role models were my parents because they taught me from such a young age about the power of love.
It's so true.
And love really can overcome all.
Love is the reason for everything or the lack of.
Absolutely.
Always.
Absolutely. And, you know, in my 50s, one of the things that has been the biggest lesson for me personally in my personal journey is that we live through and with one of two things dominating us, love or fear. And when we live driven by fear, things don't work out so well.
That's where the hate comes from.
Yeah. And insecurity and a willingness to accept second best and almost this tolerance to be treated less than you deserve. But when you come from love, and love has to start within. And towards oneself, the most amazing world opens up where you are able to have boundaries, you are able to assert your value, and you're able to see goodness and beauty and joy. And then the right people, the right opportunities are attracted into your life. You know, people call that energy.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm getting to become more of a hippie as I get older.
So I'm already there.
Yeah,
Like,
great.
I already use it. I the power of, you know, speaking life into yourself.
Absolutely.
I that resonates with me
Yeah.
so much. It's like the love of your life should be the love of your life, like just your life.
Yeah.
And everything else is just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I totally resonate with
Yeah.
you on that.
And I think when you can get to a point, and my hope is that those around me and those that I serve get to this point a lot earlier than I did, when you can get to a point where you can find and reach for the security, the stability, the safety within yourself, when you can create that, there comes a place of peace and calm and clarity that you then take with you for the rest of your
That
life.
anxiety is not gone.
Yeah.
That doesn't even happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, things like vulnerability and truth-telling and service and resilience, they come a lot easier. We've digressed. Sorry, you were asking me about heroes. So, yeah,
No,
initially...
this is how it is. It always is. I even do that.
This is how I roll. I'm sorry, but it sounds like we roll in the same direction.
Yes. Continue.
So, yeah, when I was a kid, definitely it was probably first my parents. Unfortunately, at the time in the 70s, growing up as a migrant's kid, a Muslim kid, a little girl who was largely to be seen and not heard.
That is so fascinating just around that time. Like you being here in the 70s.
Yeah.
That would have been insane.
It was a different place.
Yeah.
It was a completely different place. But sadly, I see things going backward again in our country and in our society and all around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we'll get there, but that's a much bigger topic. So that whole thing about you can't see what you can't be. Let's reverse that. You can't be what you can't see. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think I resonate with that a lot. There wasn't a lot of brown women in positions of leadership or influence that I could aspire to be. That came later. So for me, I guess my first guiding light and role model and hero outside of my close network was Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay.
I remember as a child seeing the movie Gandhi and hearing my dad speak of Gandhi as one of his heroes. And as a child for him growing up during and just after the Second World War and during partition and him even remembering as a child how much Gandhi had done to bring harmony to India and then sadly how so much of it was undone after his death. So Mahatma Gandhi was a real source of inspiration for me as I became a young adult. And then others came, Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou.
I use most of her writings on
Such
a daily
wisdom
basis.
I have not known since that incredible woman. Martin Luther King. I became really interested in this and passionate about the civil rights movement and wanting to learn more about apartheid. So they were the people that I was attracted to in terms of their wisdom, their faith, their beliefs, their strong values, and in all of their cases, the decisions that they made to put themselves in harm's way, to stand for something so important for their people and for their communities and for the future, knowing that the things that they were aspiring to and advocating for and fighting for might not necessarily be realised in their lifetime, but they saw themselves as an instrument for something that needed to happen in terms of long-term positive change and equity.
Bigger than them.
Exactly. Yeah, they were my heroes and continue to be.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, especially, I'm hearing you say this and I'm seeing the people that you've, kind of studied and looked into. And I'm like, you were doing research on you. You know? Like that's the coolest thing where this is who you are, and you're starting to incorporate all of these different
very humbling.
personalities.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but...
And just that service, that more than you, and how to really walk in that.
Yeah.
That
was the inspiration.
Yeah.
They were the people that lit and kept this flame alive in me. And then as I moved into deeper humanitarian work, I guess my heroes and sources of inspiration and strength were the everyday people, the people in communities that I served, that I advocated for, that I represented. As I said, people that suffered the most abhorrent human rights abuses, war crimes, crimes against humanity, that somehow found their way to forgiveness and a higher plane of living where they were able to transcend their earthly situations of pain and poverty and victimization and being silenced, and were able to elevate themselves to a point where they believed that love would overcome, that forgiveness was the solution. And to be entrusted by people like that, to be their voice piece, to share their stories, to fight for their justice and their equity and their right, I don't know of a greater privilege. And so for me, I look up and around me every day and ask myself, what have I done to deserve the privilege that I receive every day, to be entrusted by incredible people.
It was put upon you. This is for you. You're the mouthpiece for it. You're the one that's supposed to walk in it and through it and help those around you. It's just, I always say it's divine right. It's just who you are. It's what's been given to you. We all have gifts, and they're gifts for a reason and of purpose. And once you figure out what that purpose is, you start walking in it and you start living in it, and that's your 100%. Mode. You know, so it's
100%.
That was just you. It was supposed to. This is what it's supposed to be. You figured it out.
I agree. I own that I was given a particular gift, and the blessing is that I was able to realize the purpose of that gift. Yeah, totally.
And
that applies to all of us.
Yeah, and I know being over here in the 70s, that's why I said before, I was like, that's insane. It must have been really, really wild at that time. Like, from, through your experience and your work, what have you seen on the journey of gender equity? How has it changed, and have you seen it progress, and where do you see it going?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So the 70s was a really interesting, using your word, wild time, because it was an era of, post-Vietnam.
Yeah.
It was make love, not war. It was an era of liberalization and people feeling that they had more agency in their life, and, the arts and creativity coming to the fore, and awesome music. And there was this, I think around the world, including Australia, there was this kind of tangible vibe of hope and positivity and love. But there was also underneath that, when you talk about Australian culture, I call it an innocent ignorance, because in my lived experience, I didn't feel a malice. There was an ignorance because people didn't know any better. So, when I talk about people of colour coming to the country, and as women, people didn't know any better. And so that's where the behaviour came from. Into the late 70s and the early 80s, when there was more education, where brave people started sharing their stories, there was this openness and willingness to listen and to learn. That was very much a minority, though, because the politics and the culture was still very much driven by white, powerful men, and a conservatism that was still very much the order of the day. So I guess what I'm talking about was a minority movement amongst women and amongst diverse communities, that it still at that stage were outsiders that were growing and still trying to find their voice. But I remember seeing the seeds of recognition of what migrants and women brought to communities. But the laws, the policies, the regulations at that stage were still very archaic. You know, women were being forced to resign from their professional roles in police and in the military when they became pregnant. So things were still very much behind in terms of equity. Thankfully, a lot has improved. So legislation to a huge extent, policies, regulations, systems have come on, have matured and evolved. And we talk about equity now as a mainstream and widely accepted reality as opposed to an aspiration that one day we'll attain. Recognition that there is still work to be done, but we benefit from standing on the shoulders of, you know, incredible people that have come before that, us, particularly, you know, the bra burners, the suffragettes, strong people from ethnic and culturally diverse communities. I remember leaving Australia in the late 1990s, feeling very optimistic and hopeful that we were heading towards a trajectory where we were becoming even stronger and united in our diversity. And I saw only wonderful things to come for Australia when I made the decision to leave Australia to pursue my calling to serve at in a wider, greater, higher way. What really shocked me is having then lived and worked abroad for almost a decade and a half in the UK, in Europe, in the Middle East. I then come back to Australia and I'm shocked by not only how the country has stood still, but how it's gone backward. You know, I come back to a country in 2011 in the middle of a mining boom, where there is wealth.
There's
everywhere.
Crazy wealth at that time.
Absolute.
I've heard about that time.
Unbelievable. Cost of living, you know, housing is through the roof.
Yeah.
Everyone, it seems, has money. And there is this tangible, brazen, malicious undertone of aggression and sexism, I'd say misogyny, and racism that I don't think I even felt in the 70s. And it throws me for a loop. And I remember, because I come back a mother with 3 little boys, and I wonder what on earth I've done. Because I was convinced that coming back to Australia, as my parents had done, you know, decades before, was going to be the gift that I would be able to give my children of an incredible upbringing. And for the first couple of years when we returned home, particularly to Western Australia, I could not recognise this place that I used to once call home.
Wow.
The misogyny was, and the racism was obvious and in your face in aggressive ways in the community. And what I found in workplaces, it was really present, but in a sinister, subliminal way.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I get it. Yep.
Where there are values on websites, and we're even talking a good game. And, you know, the faces of a lot of corporations and companies are talking about equality and multiculturalism and diversity. but very few companies are walking the talk and are living those values. And I go through a period of feeling very disillusioned and very depressed and wondering when would be the right time to gather up my family and to go back overseas where things are progressing, or at least that was my experience. And then I look down at my children and I see how they're thriving. And I see how their beautiful young group of friends are so diverse and come from all different communities. And the little girls and the little boys are playing beautifully with trucks and dolls alike. And I look down and I'm reminded that at their age you don't see colour. And I look up and I see the sunshine. And I go for a walk and I see the river and the beautiful sea.
Yeah.
And I realise that I have to dig deep and I have to realise that we're here for a reason and it's the future. And that what I wanted is already coming to pass. And so through that, I give myself a stern talking to. And I pray and I look to the universe and I realise there's a reason I'm back here. And that's because there's a lot of work to be done. And so I then go on a course to find the aligned people that feel the same, that believe the same. And we start all in different ways working together to address and to do the work that needs to happen.
I absolutely love that. It was big. It was a lot bigger than you. It wasn't, you know, you looked at the kids and how they were. It's like, this isn't about me right now. It's about the future of what I want to see. And if I can't see it, then I'm going to build it. I love that. I know that we're running out of time, and I could actually talk to you for hours. And I'm going to put it to you. We'll do this again. And we got to have a part 2 to this because there's even more questions that I want to ask you. But before you go, what is next for you? What do you see that's coming for you next? Maybe in the next, 5 years.
Definitely not retirement.
No, not stopping. No.
What's next for me? I think number 1 on that list, at a time when my 3 sons are becoming young men, the most important thing is continuing to do what I can to guide them to enter into the next exciting chapter for them, which is adulthood, to be kind, aware, grounded, secure, loving young men who are confident within themselves and equally confident walking alongside strong women and other strong men who know themselves, who have clarity around their values and their identity, and who themselves in their own way search for the joy and the happiness in their life, but also commit to living lives bigger than themselves. So that's number 1. And that journey and that challenge will continue. I guess for me, it's also continuing to serve and to help others and to do the work that's necessary with other amazing people around me. So that continues to be humanitarian work, both legislatively. We need a Human Rights Act in this country and in this state. So I'm committed to continuing that work. And also the work of continuing to advocate for, to represent people that still find themselves to be victims of human rights abuses, to continue to work in that leadership and resilience space, to help those with influence in leadership positions to become even more human in their leadership and even more values aligned. And to also do what I can to raise awareness and to educate our community on some of the plagues, the epidemics that have become sadly part of the cultural fabric of our country. And I guess the number one thing when I think of that is gendered violence, violence against women and girls. It is a huge and growing problem. It has become part of our culture, and it will require not only multi-sectorial, but it will require a multi-pronged approach to try and address the deep causes. You know, and when I say that, I'm talking about addressing some of our deep cultural norms that we have to challenge. This one-dimension view that so many people still have of what masculinity is about. Alcohol and the problem and the unhealthy relationship we have with alcohol in this country. The important role that equity and safety and parity in the workplace has, you know, in terms of being a vehicle of economic empowerment for women. And the role that men, and particularly men with resources and influence, can play where they perhaps haven't played that role yet, in terms of being the right role models for other men. And I think the work that we're doing, so many incredible women are leading the charge of this work. But what I'm excited about is I'm seeing more incredible male voices joining the journey. And that's, I think, where we're going to get some traction when we walk the path together and when we invite people to the table that haven't been a part of this. Because sometimes the gold and the solution and the innovation comes from the fringes, you know, and can come from people like, you know, rehabilitated and reformed perpetrators. We need to hear their stories as much as the stories of victim survivors. And I think slowly we're finding that place where we want and we can see more and more people from different parts of our society coming together. So I know that's part of the work, part of my work that I'll continue to be involved with.
I love that. And it really is, it's just for purpose. It's moving and showing that this is a collective. It can't be just one group or one person just solely doing this. It has to be a collective. And I've always said, with your influence, when you have influence, how are you going to use that? When you have a privilege, how are you going to use that? Is it going to be self-serving, or are you going to help the people that are around you in your community? Or are you going to give support and give help? So
absolutely.
It's
I
always
think
a question
for me,
that we
Mother
have for
Teresa said it best.
Yeah.
You know, when you talk about incredible people in the world who lived lives bigger and beyond themselves. And I use this as a life mantra, and I share this with people. Mother Teresa said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water and create many ripples."
Yeah. No. Thank you so much for being here. This has been absolutely fantastic. We're going to definitely have you back, because we needed part 2 to this, because there's even more that we can get into.
I'd love that.
So thank you so much for
Pleasure,
coming.
Henry.
All right.
That concludes another episode of Voices of Gender Equity, the real and raw stories of impact. I hope this conversation has sparked your passion, revealed new insights, and inspired you to take action in the pursuit of gender equity. Remember, change begins with each one of us. So until next time, keep raising your voice, keep championing equity, and keep making a difference. This is Henry Cooper, signing off from Voices of Gender Equity, the real and raw stories of impact.